At my sister's wedding, her groom did the unthinkable after they humiliated me. The clinking champagne glasses sounded like knives scraping bone as my sister Scarlett smirked at me from the podium. My 4-year-old son, Aiden, clung to my dress under the table, his Legos scattered like broken armor. I'd spent $378 I didn't have on this teal bridesmaid gown, but all anyone saw was the failure. A 26-year-old single mom, unwanted and defective. The reception hall was a glittering nightmare. Disco ball lights spun overhead, casting shards of color across the room, but all I felt was the stiff chiffon fabric chafing my sunburned shoulders. The acidic tang of white wine clung to the air, mixing with the faint scent of roses and sweat. Scarlett's voice cut through the hum of conversation like a razor. Harper's like a couch on Facebook Marketplace. Used, but hey, free delivery. The crowd erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned, and I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the cheap linen tablecloth. Aiden peeked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with confusion. "Why's Auntie mean, Mommy?" he whispered, clutching his Lego spaceship. I forced a smile, though my throat felt like it was on fire. "She's just joking, baby," I lied, smoothing his dark curls. But the truth was, Scarlett had always been like this. Perfect Scarlett, with her flawless skin, her Ivy League degree, and now her picture-perfect wedding to Xavier. The kind of man who looked like he stepped out of a romance novel. And then there was me, Harper, the family disappointment. At 22, I'd dropped out of nursing school when Aiden's dad ghosted me. My mom, Violet, had called my pregnancy a trashy Lifetime movie plot and never missed a chance to remind me how I'd ruined my life. Scarlett's voice pulled me back to the present. "But seriously, Harper, you're such a trooper. I mean, who else would show up to their sister's wedding looking like they just rolled out of a Walmart clearance aisle?" More laughter. My stomach churned, and I reached for my glass of water, but my hand trembled so badly I nearly spilled it. Aiden tugged at my dress again. "Mommy, I don't like it here," he said, his voice small. I didn't blame him. The room felt suffocating, the weight of 100 judgmental eyes pressing down on me. But then, something shifted. Across the room, Xavier stood up. The chatter died down as he walked to the podium, his expression unreadable. Scarlett laughed, nervously. "Babe, sit down, this is my speech." But Xavier didn't sit down. He gripped the mic, his knuckles white, and turned to face the crowd. My heart pounded as his eyes locked onto mine. "Harper's son isn't defective," he said, his voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "He's my nephew." The room erupted in gasps. My mind short-circuited. "What?" Xavier turned to Violet, who was sitting at the head table, her face pale. "You lied," he said, his voice rising. "For 5 years." The room fell silent. Aiden looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Mommy, what's happening?" I didn't know. All I knew was that my world was about to change forever. The silence in the room was deafening. My heart thudded in my chest as Xavier's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. My nephew? Aiden? What was he talking about? Violet stood up, her face a mask of panic. "Xavier, sit down. This isn't the time or place." But Xavier didn't budge. His jaw tightened as he turned back to the crowd. 5 years ago, my brother Jonah got into a car accident. He died before he could make things right with Harper, before he could even know he had a son. My breath caught in my throat. Jonah, Aiden's father, the man who had disappeared without a word, leaving me alone and pregnant. I'd spent years wondering why he'd ghosted me, why he'd never answered my calls or texts. And now, here was Xavier telling me Jonah was his brother. Aiden tugged at my dress again, his voice trembling. "Mommy, who's Jonah?" I couldn't answer. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together the fragments of a story I didn't even know existed. Xavier's voice cut through the chaos. "Jonah was troubled," he said, his tone softening. "He struggled with addiction, with guilt, but he loved Harper. He wanted to find her, to make things right. But someone," he shot a glare at Violet, "made sure that never happened." Violet's face turned ashen. "Xavier, stop this. You're ruining everything." "No," Xavier said firmly. "You ruined everything when you lied. When you hid Jonah's identity to protect your precious image." The room erupted into murmurs, guests exchanging shocked glances. Scarlett looked like she was about to explode. "Xavier, what the hell are you doing? This is my wedding." But Xavier ignored her. He stepped down from the podium and walked toward me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. He knelt in front of Aiden, who was still clutching his Lego spaceship. "Hey, buddy," Xavier said gently. "I'm your uncle. Your dad was my brother." Aiden blinked up at him, his little face scrunched in confusion. "You knew Daddy?" Xavier nodded, his voice cracking. "Yeah, I did. And he would have loved you so much." Tears welled in my eyes as I watched the scene unfold. My son, who had never known his father, was now face to face with the man who could tell him everything he'd ever wanted to know. But before I could process it, Scarlett's shrill voice cut through the moment. "This is ridiculous," she screamed, storming toward us. "You're ruining my wedding, Xavier. How could you do this to me?" Xavier stood up, his expression hardening. "This isn't about you, Scarlett. This is about the truth. About Harper and Aiden." Scarlett's face twisted in rage. "Harper? Seriously? She's nothing but a..." Enough! Xavier's voice boomed, silencing her. I've stayed quiet for too long, but not anymore. The room was in chaos now. Guests whispering, phones out, recording the drama. I felt like I was in a dream, everything moving in slow motion. Xavier turned to me, his eyes pleading. Harper, I'm sorry, he said. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how, and I didn't want to ruin Scarlett's big day. I stared at him, my mind racing. You knew? This whole time? You knew? He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I found out a few weeks ago. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't know how to react. My emotions were a tangled mess. Anger, confusion, relief. But before I could say anything, Aiden tugged at my hand. Mommy, can we go? Home? He asked, his voice small and scared. I looked down at him, my heart breaking. Yeah, baby, let's go. As I gathered Aiden's Legos and my purse, Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. He handed it to me, his hand trembling. This is for you, he said quietly. I took the photo, my breath catching as I saw it. Jonah, holding a tiny baby onesie, a smile on his face that I hadn't seen in years. He wanted to find you, Xavier said. He really did. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I clutched the photo to my chest. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. All I knew was that my life had just been turned upside down. As I walked out of the reception hall, Aiden's hand in mine, I heard Xavier's voice behind me. Harper, he called. We need to talk about Jonah's trust fund for Aiden. Meet me tomorrow? I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my mind racing with questions I didn't have the answers to. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside the reception hall, Aiden's small hand gripping mine tightly. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, and a strange, aching relief. Jonah, Xavier, the trust fund, none of it made sense. And yet, it felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years were finally falling into place. Aiden looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with questions I didn't know how to answer. Mommy, why did Uncle Xavier say Daddy loved me? Did he know me? I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. No, baby, he didn't get to meet you, but he wanted to. He really wanted to. Aiden's lower lip trembled. Then why didn't he? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big ones, but that doesn't mean they don't love us. He nodded slowly, though I could tell he didn't fully understand. I didn't either. How could I explain to a 4-year-old that his father had been kept from him by the very people who were supposed to protect us? I stood up, taking Aiden's hand again. Come on, let's get to the car. As we walked through the parking lot, the sound of the reception hall faded behind us. The night was quiet, the only noise, the crunch of gravel under my heels and a distant hum of traffic. My mind kept replaying the scene inside. Xavier's confession, Scarlett's rage, Violet's pale, guilty face. When we reached the car, I buckled Aiden into his booster seat and climbed into the driver's side. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life and I pulled out of the parking lot, the reception hall disappearing in the rearview mirror. Aiden was quiet for most of the drive, his head resting against the window as he stared out at the passing streetlights. I kept glancing at him in the mirror, my heart aching for the little boy who had just learned his father was gone forever. When we got home, I carried Aiden inside, his small body heavy with exhaustion. I tucked him into bed, kissing his forehead as he drifted off to sleep. I love you, Mommy, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I love you too, baby, I whispered back, brushing a tear from my cheek. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor. The weight of the day crashed over me, and I buried my face in my hands, letting the tears flow. Jonah. The name echoed in my mind, bringing with it a flood of memories. The way he'd smiled at me that first night we met, his laugh, the way he'd held me like I was the only person in the world. And then, the silence. The unanswered calls, the texts that went unread. The day I found out I was pregnant, alone, in a cold doctor's office. I'd spent years hating him, blaming him for leaving me, for abandoning our son. But now, knowing the truth, that he'd wanted to find me, that he'd died before he could, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My phone buzzed in my purse, pulling me out of my thoughts. I wiped my tears and pulled it out, seeing a text from Xavier. Xavier, I know this is a lot, but we need to talk. Meet me tomorrow? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to shut him out and pretend none of this had happened. But another part of me, the part that had spent years searching for answers, knew I couldn't. I typed back, where? His reply came almost instantly. The coffee shop on 5th and Main, 10 a.m. I didn't respond. I just set the phone down and leaned my head back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. Tomorrow. I'd face it tomorrow. But as I sat there, the photo Xavier had given me caught my eye. It was still in my purse, the corner peeking out. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I held it up to the light. Jonah, he looked so young, so happy, and in his hands, the tiny baby onesie, blue, with little stars on it. I remembered buying that onesie back when I was still hopeful, still dreaming of a future with Jonah. Tears blurred my vision as I traced the outline of his face in the photo. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, my voice breaking. Why didn't you fight for us? But there were no answers, only the silence of the night and the ache in my chest. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and a knot in my stomach. Aiden was still asleep, his little face peaceful as he clutched his stuffed dinosaur. I kissed his forehead and tiptoed out of the room, my mind already racing with what lay ahead. The coffee shop on 5th and Main was only a 10-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white as I replayed Xavier's words in my head. Jonah's trust fund for Aiden. What did that even mean? And why had Xavier waited until now to tell me? When I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Xavier's car immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He looked up as I walked in, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. "Harper," he said, standing up as I approached. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm not sure why I'm here," I admitted, my voice tight. "But I need answers." Xavier sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I owe you that much." The waitress came over and I ordered a black coffee, my hands trembling as I wrapped them around the warm mug. Xavier waited until she was gone before speaking again. "Jonah, he wasn't perfect," he began, his voice low. "But he loved you, Harper. He really did." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "Then why did he leave? Why didn't he fight for us?" Xavier looked down at his coffee, his jaw tightening. He wanted to, but he was scared of failing you, of failing Aiden. And then, when he finally got his act together, it was too late. "Too late?" I echoed, my voice breaking. Xavier nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "He died before he could make things right, but he left something for Aiden, a trust fund. He wanted to make sure his son was taken care of, no matter what." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "A trust fund? How much are we talking about?" Xavier hesitated, then said, $500,000. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. $500,000. Enough to change our lives. Enough to give Aiden everything I'd ever wanted for him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Do you know how much we've struggled? How much I've sacrificed?" Xavier's face crumpled. "I wanted to, but Violet, she made me promise not to. She said it would ruin Scarlett's wedding, that it would cause too much drama." "Drama?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You think this is about drama? This is about my son, Xavier. My son who's been growing up without a father because of your family's lies." Xavier flinched, his eyes filled with guilt. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I'm telling you now, and I want to make things right." I leaned back in my chair, my mind spinning. $500,000. It was life-changing, but it didn't erase the pain, the years of struggling, the nights I'd spent crying myself to sleep. "What about Scarlett?" I asked, my voice cold. "Does she know about this?" Xavier shook his head. "No, and I don't plan on telling her. This is between you, me, and Aiden." I stared at him, trying to read his expression. "Why are you doing this, Xavier? Why now?" He looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because Jonah would have wanted this. And because I can't live with the guilt anymore." I didn't know what to say. My emotions were a tangled mess. Anger, relief, disbelief. But one thing was clear. This money could change everything for Aiden. "What do I need to do?" I asked finally, my voice steady. Xavier looked up, his eyes filled with relief. "I'll help you with everything. We'll set up the trust fund, make sure Aiden's taken care of. But there's one condition." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" He took a deep breath. "You can't tell Scarlett. Not yet. She's not ready to hear the truth." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Of course. God forbid we ruin her perfect little life." Xavier didn't respond. He just sat there, his hands clenched around his coffee mug, waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. This money could give Aiden everything I'd ever wanted for him. A good education, a stable future. But it came with strings attached, with secrets and lies. Finally, I nodded. "Fine, but this isn't for you, Xavier. This is for Aiden." He nodded, his shoulders slumping with relief. "Thank you, Harper." I didn't respond. I just stood up, my coffee untouched, and walked out of the coffee shop, my mind already racing with what came next. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Xavier kept his word, helping me set up the trust fund for Aiden. It was surreal, sitting in lawyers' offices and signing documents that would change our lives forever. But even as the reality of the money sank in, I couldn't shake the anger and betrayal that lingered in the back of my mind. Aiden, thankfully, was too young to fully understand what was happening. He knew something had changed, that mommy wasn't as stressed, that we could afford to buy the Lego set he'd been eyeing for months. But he didn't know about the trust fund, about Jonah, or about the family's secrets that had been kept from us for years. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mommy, is Uncle Xavier my family now?" I hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, baby, he's your uncle, and he wants to be part of our lives." Aiden nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think Daddy would have liked me?" My heart ached at the question. "Oh, Aiden," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Your daddy would have loved you so much. You're the best thing that ever happened to him." He smiled, snuggling into his blankets. "I wish I could have met him." "Me too, baby," I said, kissing his forehead. "Me too." After he fell asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed, watching him for a long time. The trust fund was a blessing, but it didn't erase the pain of the past. It didn't bring Jonah back or undo the years of struggle and heartache. The next morning, I got a call from Xavier. "Harper, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "What's wrong?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "It's Scarlett," he said. "She found out about the trust fund." My heart dropped. "How?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but she's furious. She's demanding to know why I'm giving you money, why I kept this from her." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. What did you tell her? Nothing yet, he said, but she's not going to let this go. We need to figure out how to handle this. I didn't know what to say. Scarlett had always been volatile, but this was different. This was about money, about family secrets, about the lies that had been kept from her. What do you want me to do? I asked finally. Xavier hesitated. I think we need to tell her the truth. All of it. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Xavier, she's not going to take this well. You know how she is? I know, he said, his voice heavy, but we can't keep lying to her. Not anymore. I didn't respond. The thought of facing Scarlett, of telling her the truth about Jonah and the trust fund filled me with dread. But Xavier was right. We couldn't keep hiding the truth. Fine, I said finally, but you're the one who's going to tell her. Xavier sighed. Fair enough. Can you meet me at her place tomorrow? We'll do it together. I agreed, though every fiber of my being wanted to say no. The next day, I dropped Aiden off at a friend's house and drove to Scarlett's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When I arrived, Xavier was already there, waiting outside. He looked as nervous as I felt. Ready? He asked. Not really, I admitted. He nodded, his expression grim. Me neither. We walked up to Scarlett's door together and Xavier knocked. A moment later, the door swung open and Scarlett stood there, her eyes blazing with anger. What the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice sharp. Xavier took a deep breath. Scarlett, we need to talk. She crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between us. Oh, I'm sure you do. Start talking. Xavier glanced at me, then back at Scarlett. It's about Jonah and Harper and Aiden. Scarlett's eyes narrowed. What about them? Xavier hesitated, then said, Aiden is Jonah's son, and Jonah left a trust fund for him. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Scarlett just stared at us, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, her expression shifted from confusion to anger. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. What did you just say? Xavier took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Scarlett, I know this is a lot to take in, but Jonah wanted to make sure Aiden was taken care of. Stop, Scarlett interrupted, her voice rising. Just stop. Are you telling me that Harper's son is Jonah's? That my brother had a child with her? Xavier nodded, his expression pained. Yes. Scarlett's face turned red, her hands clenched into fists. And you knew about this? This whole time? You knew? Not the whole time, Xavier admitted, but I found out a few weeks ago, and I wanted to tell you, but what? Scarlett screamed, her voice echoing through the hallway. But you didn't want to ruin your perfect little life? Is that it? Xavier flinched, but before he could respond, Scarlett turned to me, her eyes filled with venom. And you, she spat. You knew about this too, didn't you? You've been planning this all along, haven't you? I shook my head, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. No, Scarlett, I didn't know. Not until the wedding. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Oh, please. You expect me to believe that? You've always been jealous of me, Harper. Always trying to steal the spotlight. And now this? You're unbelievable. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Scarlett, this isn't about you. This is about Aiden, about giving him the future he deserves. But Scarlett wasn't listening. She turned back to Xavier, her eyes blazing. And you, how could you do this to me? How could you keep this from me? Xavier sighed, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, Scarlett, I really am. But this isn't about us. It's about Aiden. Scarlett shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, this is about you choosing her over me again. And with that, she slammed the door in our faces, leaving us standing there in stunned silence. The sound of the door slamming echoed in the hallway, leaving Xavier and me standing there in stunned silence. I could feel the weight of Scarlett's anger radiating through the door, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Xavier ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. That didn't go well. You think? I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. What did you expect, Xavier? That she'd just be okay with this? He sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't know what I expected, but I thought she'd at least listen. I shook my head, my frustration bubbling over. Scarlett doesn't listen. She never has. This was a mistake. Xavier looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry, Harper. I didn't mean to make things worse. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Scarlett wasn't going to let this go. I knew that much. And if she decided to make this public, it could blow up in our faces. We need to figure out how to handle this, I said finally, my voice low. Before she does something we'll all regret. Xavier nodded, his expression grim. You're right, but how? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we couldn't let Scarlett's anger derail everything we'd worked for. Aiden's future was at stake, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. We left Scarlett's apartment and drove back to my place in silence. When we got there, Aiden was playing in the living room with his Legos, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Mommy, he called, holding up a half-built spaceship. Look what I made! I forced a smile, kneeling down beside him. That's amazing, baby! You're so creative! He beamed, his little face lighting up with pride. Uncle Xavier, look! Xavier crouched down next to us, his expression softening as he admired Aiden's creation. Wow, buddy, that's incredible. You're going to be an engineer one day. Aiden giggled, his laughter filling the room. It was a moment of pure joy, a stark contrast to the tension that had been hanging over us all day. But as I watched them together, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Scarlett's anger was a ticking time bomb, and I didn't know how to defuse it. Later that evening, after Aiden was asleep, Xavier and I sat at the kitchen table, trying to come up with a plan. We need to talk to Violet, Xavier said finally. She's the one who who started all of this. Maybe she can help us fix it. I shook my head, my stomach churning at the thought. Violet? You think she's going to help us? She's the one who lied in the first place. Xavier sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but she's also the only one who can get through to Scarlet. If anyone can calm her down, it's Violet. I didn't like the idea, but I knew he was right. Violet was the matriarch of the family, the one who had always held the strings. If anyone could control Scarlet, it was her. The next morning, we drove to Violet's house, the tension in the car palpable. When we arrived, she was waiting for us on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. I was wondering when you'd show up, she said, her voice cold. Xavier stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Violet, we need to talk about Scarlet, about everything. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. I figured as much. Come inside. We followed her into the living room, the air thick with tension. Violet sat down in her armchair, her gaze flicking between us. So, she said finally, what's the damage? Xavier took a deep breath, his voice steady. Scarlet found out about the trust fund, about Jonah, and she's not taking it well. Violet's expression didn't change. And we need your help, I said, my voice tight. She's angry, Violet. Really angry, and if she decides to go public with this, it could ruin everything. Violet leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. And whose fault is that? I flinched, her words hitting me like a slap. This isn't about fault, I said, my voice rising. This is about Aiden, about giving him the future he deserves. Violet's gaze hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. Don't you dare lecture me about what Aiden deserves. I've done everything I can to protect this family. By lying, I shot back, my anger boiling over. By keeping secrets, by letting Scarlet humiliate me at her wedding. Violet's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, Xavier stepped in. Enough, he said, his voice firm. This isn't helping. We need to figure out how to fix this together. Violet sighed, her shoulders slumping. Fine, what do you want me to do? Xavier glanced at me, then back at Violet. Talk to Scarlet. Make her understand that this isn't about her, that it's about Aiden. Violet nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'll talk to her, but I can't promise she'll listen. That's all we can ask, Xavier said, his voice heavy with relief. As we left Violet's house, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Scarlet's anger was a wild card, and I didn't know how this was going to play out. But one thing was clear. The truth had finally come out, and there was no going back. The next few days were tense. Violet had promised to talk to Scarlet, but we hadn't heard anything from either of them. The silence was unnerving, and I couldn't stop imagining the worst-case scenarios. Scarlet going public with the story, the media getting involved, Aiden's life being turned upside down. Aiden, thankfully, was still blissfully unaware of the drama. He was too busy building elaborate Lego creations and asking endless questions about space, but every time I looked at him, my heart ached with the weight of everything that had happened. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up the living room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Xavier. Xavier, Violet talked to Scarlet. She's calmed down, but she wants to meet all of us tonight. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. A meeting with Scarlet? That sounded like a disaster waiting to happen, but I knew we didn't have a choice. Me. Where? Xavier. Her place. 7 p.m. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Okay, I muttered to myself. We can do this. That evening, I dropped Aiden off at a friend's house and drove to Scarlet's apartment. Xavier was already there, waiting outside. He looked as nervous as I felt. Ready? He asked. Not really, I admitted. He nodded, his expression grim. Me neither. We walked up to Scarlet's door together, and Xavier knocked. A moment later, the door swung open, and Scarlet stood there, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Come in, she said, her voice cold. We followed her into the living room, where Violet was sitting on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Scarlet sat down across from us, her gaze flicking between me and Xavier. So, she said finally, let's hear it. Xavier took a deep breath, his voice steady. Scarlet, we're sorry. We never meant to hurt you, but this isn't about us. It's about Aiden. Scarlet's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. Jonah left a trust fund for Aiden, Xavier continued. He wanted to make sure his son was taken care of no matter what, and we're just trying to honor that. Scarlet's jaw tightened, but she still didn't say anything. Violet leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. Scarlet, I know this is hard to hear, but this isn't about you. It's about doing what's right for Aiden. Scarlet finally spoke, her voice trembling with anger. And what about me? What about my wedding? My life? Did any of you even think about how this would affect me? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Scarlet, we didn't want to hurt you, but we couldn't keep this secret anymore. Aiden deserves to know the truth. Scarlet shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about Aiden. This is about me, about how everyone always chooses you over me. I flinched, her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. Scarlet, that's not true. Yes, it is, she screamed, her voice echoing through the room. You've always been the favorite, the one everyone feels sorry for. And now this? It's just another way for you to steal the spotlight. I didn't know what to say. Her words stung, but I could see the pain behind her anger. This wasn't just about the trust fund or Jonah. This was about years of resentment, of feeling overlooked and overshadowed. Xavier stepped forward, his voice gentle. Scarlet, we're not choosing Harper over you. We're trying to do what's right for Aiden. That's all. Scarlet shook her head, her tears tears falling faster. You don't understand. You'll never understand. Violet stood up, her expression softening. Scarlett, I know this is hard, but we're family, and family sticks together, no matter what. Scarlett looked at her eyes filled with pain. Do we? Because it doesn't feel like it. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I didn't know how to fix this, how to make things right, but I knew we had to try. Scarlett, I said finally, my voice soft. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you, and I don't want to fight. I just want what's best for Aiden. She didn't respond. She just sat there, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Xavier stepped forward, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. We'll figure this out, Scarlett, together. She leaned into him, her sobs quieting as he held her. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. But as I looked at Scarlett, at the pain in her eyes, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The truth had torn our family apart, and it was going to take more than a few apologies to put it back together. The days that followed the meeting with Scarlett were tense but oddly hopeful. She didn't forgive us overnight, far from it, but she stopped lashing out, stopped making threats. It was as if the storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm. Xavier and I worked together to finalize the details of Aiden's trust fund. It was a surreal process, sitting in lawyers' offices and signing documents that would secure my son's future. But even as the reality of the money sank in, I couldn't shake the lingering guilt over the pain we'd caused Scarlett, over the secrets that had torn our family apart. Aiden, thankfully, remained blissfully unaware of the drama. He was too busy being a kid, building Lego masterpieces, asking endless questions about dinosaurs, and begging me to take him to the park. Every time I looked at him, I felt a surge of gratitude. No matter what happened, he was my priority. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, Mommy, is Auntie Scarlett mad at us? I hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Auntie Scarlett is just going through a tough time, baby. But she loves you. We all do. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I don't want her to be sad. My heart ached at his words. Me neither, sweetie. But sometimes grown-ups have to work through their feelings, and that's okay. He smiled, snuggling into his blankets. Okay, Mommy. I love you. I love you too, baby, I whispered, kissing his forehead. After he fell asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed, watching him for a long time. The trust fund was a blessing, but it didn't erase the pain of the past. It didn't bring Jonah back or undo the years of struggle and heartache. The next morning, I got a call from Xavier. Harper, we need to talk, he said, his voice tense. What's wrong? I asked, my stomach tightening. It's Scarlett, he said. She wants to see you, alone. My heart dropped. Why? I don't know, he admitted. But she said, it's important. I didn't know what to say. The thought of facing Scarlett alone filled me with dread, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Okay, I said finally. I'll go. That afternoon, I drove to Scarlett's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When I arrived, she was waiting for me on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Come in, she said, her voice cold. I followed her into the living room, the air thick with tension. She sat down across from me, her gaze piercing. I've been thinking, she said finally, about everything. I nodded, my heart pounding. And she took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I'm still angry, but I get it. This isn't about me. It's about Aiden. I didn't know what to say. This was the first time Scarlett had acknowledged that, and it felt like a small but significant step forward. Scarlett, I said finally, my voice soft. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I know, and I'm sorry too, for everything. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then slowly, Scarlett reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. This is for you, she said, handing it to me. I unfolded it, my breath catching as I saw what it was. A photo of Jonah holding a baby onesie, but this time there was a note scrawled on the back. Harper, I'm sorry. I love you, always. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I clutched the photo to my chest. Where did you get this? I whispered. Scarlett sighed, her voice heavy with regret. Jonah gave it to me a few weeks before he died. He asked me to give it to you, but I didn't. I was angry, jealous, and I've regretted it ever since. I didn't know what to say. The pain in her voice was raw, real, and for the first time I saw the sister I'd grown up with. Not the angry, bitter version of her, but the girl who'd once been my best friend. Scarlett, I said finally, my voice breaking. Thank you. She nodded, her tears falling faster. I'm sorry, Harper, for everything. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Me too. For the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same page. The anger, the resentment, the secrets, they were still there, but they didn't feel as heavy. As I left Scarlett's apartment that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we might actually get through this. The weeks that followed were a turning point for our family. Scarlett and I began to rebuild our relationship, one tentative conversation at a time. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, of old wounds resurfacing, but we were trying. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were moving forward, not just rehashing the past. Aiden's trust fund was finalized, and with it came a sense of security I hadn't felt in a long time. We didn't go overboard, no fancy cars or extravagant vacations, but we were able to move into a better neighborhood, enroll Aiden in a great school, and start saving for his future. It was a relief, knowing that he would have opportunities I never did. Xavier became a regular presence in our lives, stepping into the role of uncle with a quiet determination. He and Aiden bonded over Legos and space documentaries, and it was heartwarming to see how much they enjoyed each other's company. Scarlett, too, started spending more time with Aiden, though it was clear she was still figuring out how to navigate her new role as his aunt. One evening, as we all sat around the dinner table, me, Aiden, Xavier, and Scarlett, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. After dinner, Scarlett pulled me aside, her expression serious. "Harper, there's something I need to tell you." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I've been talking to Xavier, and I think it's time we told Aiden the whole truth. About Jonah. About everything." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Are you sure? He's so young." Scarlett nodded. "I know, but he deserves to know where he comes from, and we owe it to him to be honest." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, but we need to do it together." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Together. The next day, we sat Aiden down and told him the truth. About Jonah, about the trust fund, about the family secrets that had been kept from him for so long. It was a difficult conversation, but Aiden handled it with the resilience and curiosity only a child could have. "So Daddy loved me?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Yes, baby," I said, my voice breaking. "He loved you so much." Aiden nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I wish I could have met him." "Me too," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. As I held him, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. The truth had been painful, but it had also set us free. The story doesn't end here, of course. Life is messy and families are complicated, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the right path. And as I looked around at the people I loved, Aiden, Xavier, even Scarlett, I knew that no matter what happened next, we would face it together.